there, my fellow history enthusiasts, and welcome to today's installment of Awesome Americans Throughout Our History. On today's video, we're going to be covering a man who just might be one of the biggest legends in Marine Corps history. And he just so happens to be one of the 30 Native Americans to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Yes, sir. Today's video is going to be covering the story of Pappy Boyington today, the Marine Corps pilot in World War II who splashed down so many zeros that he was asked to go back and train the new guys because he was such an effective fighter pilot. So please, do yourself a favor real quick. Go to the kitchen, grab a snack and a drink, maybe even take a whiz while you're at it, because this is going to be the coolest story you have ever heard. The towering pines of northern Idaho lay covered in snow during the cold December winter as a baby Gregory Boyington entered the world on December 4th of 1912 in the rugged town of Coeur d'Alene. Grace and Charles couldn't have possibly imagined that the adorable little infant, wrapped against the winter chill that day, would one day become one of the most celebrated fighter pilots in the Marine Corps history. You see, his name, one invoking thoughts of humor and peace and amazing warfighter skills, would eventually become synonymous with courage, daring, and aerial combat. But those extraordinary accomplishments began in humble surroundings far removed from the battlefields of World War II. You see, when Pappy was only 3 years old, his family moved to the logging community of St. Marie, Idaho. Nestled among dense forests and surrounded by hard-working lumbermen, the town was a quiet place where determination and the grim Barrett mentality were necessities rather than virtues. You see, every day the sound of axes, saws, and steam-powered logging equipment echoed through the valley. Men worked from the time the sun rose until the darkness returned that night, risking their lives and well-being among the towering timber to provide for their families. Growing up in St. Marie, Pappy learned early that life rewarded grit and determination. He watched his father and the other Argos battle the elements, witnessed crews working together despite the dangerous conditions, and absorbed the lessons of grit that would later serve him well in his later life. The forest became his playground. He climbed trees, explored streams, and spent countless hours outdoors, developing the confidence and independence that would define him throughout his later life. He was also proud of his Brule Sioux blood, a lineage that connected him to generations of warriors who had lived with courage and perseverance. Those early roots remained an important part of who he was. One core experience among Pappy's earliest memories was an experience that ignited a fascination unlike anything he had ever known. At only 6 years old, he climbed aboard an airplane piloted by the one and only Clyde Pangborn, an adventurous aviator whose own name would later become famous for completing the first non-stop flight across the Pacific Ocean. For Gregory, the brief flight over the Idaho countryside changed everything. You see, in his eyes, the earth shrank beneath him, while the forest became a carpet of green vegetation, and the rivers twisted through it like silver ribbons. The freedom of flight had left an impression that never faded from him. Long before he understood engineering or military aviation, young Gregory Boyington knew that he wanted to fly. That single experience planted a dream that would survive every hardship life would later place on him. At the age of 12, Gregory's family relocated once again this time to Tacoma, Washington. Now, the bustling city of the roaring 1920s was dramatically different from the isolated logging towns of Idaho. Tacoma's busy streets, industries, and growing schools exposed him to a larger world full of opportunity. He enrolled at Lincoln High School, where he quickly distinguished himself as an exceptional athlete. Wrestling became his passion, and the sport demanded relentless conditioning, mental toughness, and the willingness to endure pain without surrender. And Pappy embraced every aspect of it. The practices were exhausting, and the matches were brutal. Yet, every contest taught lessons that extended far beyond the wrestling mat. You see, victory depended upon one's preparation, and defeat, well, it demanded improvement. Excuses meant nothing, and those principles would later define his leadership in combat. You see, teachers also recognized his intelligence, while classmates noticed his fierce competitiveness, and Pappy rarely accepted second place in anything that he attempted. Although sports occupied much of his attention, his fascination with airplanes never disappeared. Every aircraft that passed overhead captured his imagination. Aviation was still young during the 1920s, you see. Newspapers celebrated daring pilots who pushed the limits of human achievement. Air races filled headlines. Charles Lindbergh's historic Atlantic crossing inspired an entire generation of young pilots. Gregory became one of countless young Americans captivated by the possibilities of flight, and by the time he graduated from Lincoln High School in 1930, the nation had entered the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, families struggled financially, uncertainty clouded America's future. But despite those challenges, Gregory Boyington refused to abandon his ambitions. Instead, he enrolled at the University of Washington in Seattle. The rigorous classroom inside the University of Washington represent far more than education. You see, at Pappy, it became the place where he transformed himself from an athletic young man into a future military officer and aviation engineer. You see, he joined the Army ROTC, where military discipline reinforced many of the qualities he had already developed through his athletic training. And by his second year, he advanced to the rank of cadet captain, demonstrating natural leadership among his fellow students. Outside the classroom, Pappy became deeply involved in campus life. He joined the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity and competed on both the university wrestling and swimming teams, although his greatest athletic success came on the wrestling mat. Competing against some of the finest collegiate wrestlers in the Pacific Northwest, Pappy captured the Pacific Northwest Intercollegiate Middleweight Wrestling Championship belt. His combination of strength, balance, and determination made him an exceptionally difficult opponent. Those who faced him often remarked that he never appeared intimidated. He attacked every challenge with confidence, but his summers were anything but easy. Rather than spending vacations relaxing, Pappy saw demanding work that built both character and experience. He labored in mining camps. He worked in logging camps similar to those of his childhood. He helped the Coeur d'Alene Fire Protective Association with road construction projects. Each job strengthened his appreciation for hard work and exposed him to men who measured success by perseverance rather than comfort. Meanwhile, his academic studies centered on aeronautical engineering. You see, the science fascinated him. He learned how wings generated lift. He studied engines, structural design, and aircraft performance. Every lecture brought him closer to understanding the machines that had captivated him since childhood. In 1934, Pappy graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering. It was an impressive achievement during one of the nation's most difficult economic periods. Shortly after graduation, he got married and accepted a position with Boeing in Seattle as a draftsman and engineer. For many young men, this would represent the fulfillment of a dream, right? A stable career, a loving wife, and a respected company. A promising future certainly lay ahead. But Pappy found himself looking towards the sky far more often than towards his own drafting table. Designing airplanes was satisfying, sure, but flying them promised something greater. And within a year, he would leave behind the security of civilian life to pursue the dream first awakened during that unforgettable childhood flight over the forests of Idaho that day. The decision would place him on the path leading first to the United States Marine Corps, then to the legendary Flying Tigers, and ultimately into some of the fiercest aerial battles of the Second World War. In the spring of 1935, Gregory Boyington stood at a crossroads. You see, he was a young engineer with a promising future at Boeing, a college graduate with military training behind him, and an athlete whose competitive spirit had carried him through 4 years of wrestling and swimming. Yet, something continued to pull at him. The opportunity appeared through the Aviation Cadet Act, a program designed to train new military pilots. Boyington applied for flight training, believing that his education, ROTC experience, and engineering background made him an excellent candidate. But then he discovered a slight problem. You see, the program excluded married men, and Pappy, well, he was married, and the rules appeared to end his aviation ambitions before they could even begin. But the discovery led him to investigate something much more personal. You see, throughout his childhood and early adulthood, Gregory had lived as Gregory Hollenbeck, believing that his stepfather, Ellsworth J. Hollenbeck, was his biological father. While researching his eligibility, he obtained a copy of his birth certificate and learned a truth that he had never known. His biological father was actually Charles Boyington, a dentist. His parents had divorced when he was an infant. The name he had been born with was not Hollenbeck. It was Boyington, and this discovery changed the course of his life for the good. Because there was no record of a marriage under the name Gregory Boyington, he was able to apply for aviation training under his given birth name. The young engineer from Idaho was about to become a military aviator, and on June 13th of 1935, he transferred to the United States Marine Corps Reserve. After a brief period of inactive duty, he accepted an appointment as an aviation cadet on February 18, 1936, and reported at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida, the birthplace of thousands of naval aviators. The flight training was demanding, and the Marine Corps did not seek merely competent pilots, it sought officers capable of leading men into combat roles. Cadets learned navigation, aircraft systems, aerial maneuvers, and the discipline required to survive in the unforgiving environment of military aviation. And boy, did Boyington excel. You see, his athletic background helped him endure the physical demands. His engineering education allowed him to understand aircraft performance better than many of his classmates. His competitive nature pushed him to master every skill placed before him. And on March 11, 1937, Gregory Boyington earned his designation as a naval aviator. The dream that began above the Idaho forest that day had become reality. He had earned his wings. So after he had earned his wings, Boynton was transferred to Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, where he joined Aircraft One Fleet Marine Force. The Marine Corps quickly recognized his potential. You see, he was intelligent, aggressive, and confident, qualities that could make an exceptional fighter pilot. And in July of 1937, he was discharged from the Marine Corps Reserve to accept a commission as second lieutenant in the active duty Marine Corps. The transition from aviator to Marine officer required more than flying ability. Marines expected their officers to lead from the front, understand their men, and make the difficult decisions under extreme pressure. And Boynton attended the basic school in Philadelphia from July 1938 to January 1939, where he received instruction in leadership, tactics, and military operations. After completing training, he was assigned to the 2nd Marine Aircraft Group at San Diego Naval Air Station. But the world around him was changing rapidly. You see, across Europe and Asia, nations were moving towards conflict. Japan's military expansion in the Pacific threatened American interests, and the importance of naval aviation grew every year. Boynton participated in fleet exercises involving the aircraft carriers USS Lexington and the USS Yorktown. Operating from carriers required precision and courage. Pilots had to launch from moving decks, navigate over endless ocean, and return to a small landing area surrounded by waves. There was no room for mistakes. The ocean offered no forgiveness. And by November 1940, Boynton had been promoted to first lieutenant. In December, he returned to Pensacola, not as a student, but as an instructor. Teaching the young pilots forced him to refine his own understanding of aviation. Every lesson, every correction, and every demonstration helped prepare him for the war that was quickly approaching. But Boynton was not an easy man to command. You see, he was outspoken, he was independent, and he had little patience for the dog and pony show that was the flag officer bureaucracy. Those qualities would make him both respected and yet controversial throughout his entire career. While serving as an instructor at Pensacola, an argument with another officer one day escalated into physical confrontation. Boynton struck the officer, and suddenly his future in the Marine Corps appeared uncertain. And court-martial seemed possible. Then came an opportunity that would change his life forever. Representatives arrived, seeking experienced American fighter pilots willing to fight in China against Japanese forces. They were recruiting men for a secretive organization that would soon become legendary, the American Volunteer Group, but the world would know them as the Flying Tigers. You see, in 1941, the war had not yet officially reached the United States, but the conflict in Asia was already raging. Japan's military expansion had brought devastation across all of China, and the Chinese government desperately needed experienced pilots who could challenge Japanese air power. The opportunity appealed to Boynton immediately. It offered exactly what he wanted: combat flying and a chance to prove himself. And so, on August 26, 1941, Gregory Boynton resigned his Marine Corps commission and accepted a position with the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, a civilian organization supporting the creation of a special air unit in China. That unit became the American Volunteer Group, commanded by legendary aviator Claire Chennault. If you're familiar with the Fat Electrician, he did a whole video on Chennault. I guarantee you should go and check it out sometime. And from the get-go, the Flying Tigers were an unusual organization. You see, They were not officially part of the United States military. They were volunteers, and they flew American-built aircraft. But they fought alongside Chinese forces, and they faced one of the most experienced air forces in the entire world. Their aircraft carried the famous shark-mouth markings that would become one of the most recognizable symbols of World War II. Boyington quickly proved himself to be a skilled fighter pilot. He became a flight leader, participated in missions against Japanese forces in Burma and China, where the combat was intense and brutal. Japanese pilots, you see, were highly trained, aggressive, and experienced, and the skies over China and Burma became a deadly arena where small groups of aircraft fought battles that could determine the survival of entire ground forces. Boyington adapted very quickly, though. He was aggressive, he was fearless, and he was willing to take risks. But he was also difficult. You see, his personality often clashed with leadership. His relationship with Claire Chennault became strained, and many pilots viewed him with suspicion because of his drinking and his tendency to exaggerate his accomplishments. In essence, Boyington was not a polished military figure. He was rough around the edges. He could be arrogant at times. He could be reckless at times. But when he climbed into a fighter aircraft, those around him knew they were following a man who understood combat. During his time with the Flying Tigers, Boyington was officially credited with destroying 2 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 1.5 aircraft destroyed on the ground. But Boyington always maintained that his actual aerial victories were much higher, claiming that he had destroyed 6 enemy aircraft while in the air. The Marine Corps later accepted his higher total after reviewing his wartime record. The Flying Tigers gave him something that he had been seeking since childhood, the experience of real combat. But the assignment also revealed something important. Boyington was not simply a pilot. He was a fighter leader, and he had the ability to inspire men in dangerous situations because he understood aggression. He understood courage, and he understood the psychological battle that took place every time aircraft met in the sky. In April 1942, Boyington left the Flying Tigers and returned to the United States. The world was changing. America was now fully committed into World War II. The Marine Corps needed experienced combat pilots, and Gregory "Pappy" Boyington was about to return to the service, where he would become one of the greatest fighter pilots, aces, in American history. So when Gregory Boyington returned to the United States in 1942, he was no longer the same young officer who had left the Marine Corps the year before. You see, the Flying Tigers, well, they changed him. China and Burma had taught him lessons no classroom could ever provide. He had seen men pushed to their limits. He had experienced the fear and intensity of aerial combat. He had learned that survival depended not only on flying skill, but on courage, instinct, and the ability to make decisions within seconds. America was now fully engaged in World War II, and on September 29, 1942, Boyington returned to the U.S. Marine Corps, receiving a commission as a major. The Marine Corps knew exactly what they were getting. They knew that they were not receiving a quiet, predictable officer. Negative. They knew that they were receiving a combat-tested pilot with experience against the Japanese forces. Boyington was assigned to the Marine Aircraft Group 11 of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing and deployed to the South Pacific. His first assignment was with the Marine Fire Squadron 122, operating from the island of Guadalcanal. Now, on the ground and in the air, Guadalcanal was one of the most brutal campaigns of the Pacific War. You see, the island itself was a place of exhaustion and hardship. Heat, disease, rain, and constant combat wore down both the men and the machine alike. Aircraft operated from rough airfields, often under difficult conditions, while Japanese forces attempted to regain control of the strategically important island. Boyington served as executive officer of VMF-122. Now, although he knew combat missions, he didn't record any enemy aircraft victories while assigned to the squadron, but his reputation as a leader continued to grow. You see, he understood his pilots what they were feeling. He understood combat, and he knew that confidence in a pilot could be the difference between life and death. After his first time with VMF-122, Boyington briefly commanded Marine Fighter Squadron 112 from July to August of 1943. Then came the assignment that would define his place in history. In September of 1943, Gregory Boyington took command of Marine Fighter Squadron 214. The unit would soon become legendary, but the world would know them as the Black Sheep Squadron. You see, when Boyington arrived to take command of VMF 212, the squadron was a collection of talented but inexperienced pilots. You see, many had just recently completed training. Others had some combat experience, sure, but lacked the cohesion of a veteran fighting unit. But Boyington saw their potential. He also saw an opportunity. At 31 years old, he was considerably older than most of the Marines under his command. To many of his pilots, he seemed like an old man compared to them. They jokingly called him Gramps, but the nickname did not last, and a new version soon emerged, Pappy. And, well, the name fit him. You see, he was older than his pilots, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had already experienced the war. He was demanding, yes, but he also understood the responsibilities of being in command. He expected his men to fly aggressively. He expected discipline. He expected courage. Most importantly, he expected them to trust one another while in combat. You see, the aircraft that carried VMF 214 in combat was the magnificent Vought F-4U Corsair. Now, the Corsair was one of the most advanced fighters of the war. You see, it was fast, it was heavily armed, it had tremendous range. Its distinctive bent wings and powerful engine made it instantly recognizable. But it was also a demanding aircraft. The Corsair required skill and confidence. In the hands of capable pilots, however, it became one of the deadliest fighters in the Pacific War, and Boyington and his Black Sheep Squadron quickly earned a reputation. They attacked aggressively. They struck targets that seemed impossible. They challenged Japanese aircraft even when heavily outnumbered. Their missions carried them over some of the most dangerous areas of the Pacific Ocean, including the Russell Islands, New Georgia, Bougainville, New Britain, and New Ireland. The Japanese have built a formidable air presence throughout the region. Their pilots were experienced. Their aircraft were dangerous. Every mission required complete concentration, but there was no guarantee of returning. And Boyington, well, he thrived in that kind of environment. You see, within 32 days of intense combat, he destroyed 14 enemy fighter aircraft. His reputation grew with every mission, and by late December 1943, his official total had climbed to 25 victories. He was becoming one of America's most feared fighter pilots, an ace of ace. Among all Boyington's missions, One stood out as a perfect example of his aggressive leadership. On October 17th, 1943, Boynton led his Black Sheep Squadron in an attack against Japanese airfields at Kahili on the southern tip of Bougainville. The mission, well, it was dangerous, and lots of Japanese aircraft were stationed at the field. But, you see, the enemy, they knew the area well. They had plenty of defenses, and they had experienced pilots. So Boynton led 24 fighters toward the target, and as they approached, he saw the Japanese aircraft below. Approximately 60 Japanese arrows sat on the ground. And probably most commanders, they probably would have considered the odds, well, too dangerous. But Boynton, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. Instead of simply attacking and leaving, like usual, he ordered his fighters to circle the airfield. The message he was sending to the Japanese was clear. They were challenging the Japanese Air Force. No, scratch that. They were taunting them. Come and fight us. And the tactic, well, it worked. Quickly the Japanese aircraft launched. Suddenly the sky filled with fighter pilots. Engines roared, machine guns flashed, and the aircraft twisted and turned in the violent aerial combat. The battle became a chaotic struggle between skilled pilots fighting for survival. When it ended, the results were extraordinary. The Black Sheep had destroyed 20 Japanese aircraft. Not a single American aircraft had been lost, and the victory became one of the most celebrated actions of the Pacific Air War. And it demonstrated everything that defined Boynton as a commander: aggression, confidence, and deliberative action, tactical creativity, and the willingness to challenge overwhelming odds. His pilots believed in him because he flew with them. He didn't sit safely behind the lines. He led from the cockpit. That was the quality that made him more than just an ace. It made him a leader. So by January of 1944, Boynton had become one of America's most famous fighter pilots. Now, his official victory count had reached 26, and that number to America's aerial combatants carried a special meaning. You see, it surpassed the legendary World War I record held by Eddie Rickenbacker, who had been credited with 26 enemy aircraft destroyed. Boynton had reached the top, but war does not allow heroes to remain untouched, and on January 3, 1944, Boynton led a major fight sweep over Rabaul, one of the strongest Japanese bases in the Pacific Ocean. The mission involved approximately 48 American fighter pilots, including aircraft from VMF 214, VF 33, and VMF 211, and Boynton served as tactical commander. The fighters arrived over the target in the morning. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, the battle began, and both American and Japanese aircraft collided in the sky. The fight became a swirling mass of aircraft, smoke, and gunfire. During the battle, Boynton was seen shooting down his 26th aircraft. Then he disappeared into the chaos. His wingman, Captain George Ashman, was killed, and Boynton did not return. The Marine Corps searched all over. The squadron raided in a perplexed situation, but there was no sign of him. Eventually, Gregory Boynton was declared missing in action. To those who knew him, the possibility seemed almost impossible. Pappy Boyington, the man who had survived countless missions, who had challenged entire formations of enemy aircraft, who had become the symbol of the Black Sheep Squadron, was gone. But the truth was far from different. You see, Boynton was still alive. He had survived the crash, and somewhere in Japanese-controlled waters, his greatest battle was about to begin. not in the sky, but on the ground, as a prisoner of war. You see, for the men of Black Sheep Squadron, January 3rd, 1944, was a day that seemed impossible to understand. Their commander was gone. For the men of the Black Sheep Squadron, January 3rd, 1944, was a day that seemed impossible to understand. Their commander was gone. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington had led them into another dangerous mission over Japanese territory. Just as he had done countless times before, he had always been the man at the front, the first into danger, and often the last one to leave. But this time, his aircraft never returned. The Marine Corps listed him as missing in action, and the news was devastating. You see, to a squadron, Boyington was more than a commanding officer. He was the personality that held them together. He was demanding, stubborn, and sometimes difficult, but he had earned their loyalty through his actions. You see, he had fought beside them. He had fought beside them. He had risked his life with them. And what nobody in the United States knew was that Boyington had survived. After his aircraft went down, you see, he was recovered by the Japanese submarine, the I-1A-1. The submarine's crew pulled him from the water and transported him to Japanese-controlled territory. The man who had become one of America's most feared fighter pilots was now completely powerless. He was no longer sitting behind the controls of a Corsair. He was no longer leading a squadron. He was now a prisoner. But the Japanese army did not treat him as a recognized prisoner of war. You see, his capture was not properly reported to the International Red Cross, and for months his family and fellow Marines had no idea where he was, or if he was even alive. The world believed Gregory Boyington might be dead. The reality was far more complicated. His war was not over, it had simply changed. Boyington's first destination was Brawl, the same Japanese stronghold that he had attacked from the air only months earlier. He had looked down upon the base through the canopy of his fighter aircraft. Now, he entered it as a prisoner, and the contrast could not have been more dramatic. The Japanese forces that had feared him in combat now controlled every aspect of his existence. From Marboul, Boyington was eventually transported to Truk, where he endured another difficult chapter of captivity. During his imprisonment there, he survived Operation Hailstone, the massive U.S. Navy attack against the Japanese forces based at Truk in February 1944. The raid demonstrated the growing strength of American forces in the Pacific region. Prisoners like Boyington had created a terrifying situation. You see, bombs fell all around. Aircraft by the hundreds attacked. Explosions shook the area. The same American military he had once fought alongside was now striking the very place where he was being held. Later, Boyington was transported to Japan. He was held first at Ofuna prison camp and eventually at Omari prison camp near Tokyo. Captivity tested him in ways combat never had. In the cockpit, Boyington controlled his own fate. He could maneuver, he could attack, he could fight, but in prison he had almost no control. The days were long, the conditions were harsh. The uncertainty was constant, yet Boyington endured. You see, his stubbornness, the same quality that sometimes caused conflict during his career, became a source of survival. He refused to surrender mentally. He refused to allow captivity to erase who he was. Among his fellow prisoners were remarkable men, including Captain Richard O'Kane, a Medal of Honor recipient who commanded the U.S. submarine, the Tang, and Lieutenant Louis Zamperini, the former Olympic distance runner, who had become a prisoner after his aircraft was shot down. Shared the same experience. They had all fought. They had all survived. They had all been forced to endure conditions few people could imagine. During captivity, Boyington was selected for a temporary promotion to lieutenant colonel. The promotion was recognition of his leadership and combat achievements, though he would not learn the full extent of the honors awaiting him until after the war. By the summer of 1945, the war was approaching its end. The Japanese Empire was collapsing, and American forces were advancing throughout the Pacific area. Then came the events that changed history. The United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. For thousands of Allied prisoners, freedom finally arrived on August 29th of 1945. Gregory Boyington was liberated from the Omari prison camp. After nearly 20 months as a prisoner, he was freed. The fighter pilot, who had disappeared over rubble, returned to a world that had been assumed that he was gone forever. On September 12, 1945, Boyington arrived back in the United States at Naval Air Station Alameda, California. Waiting for him were 21 former members of the VMF 214, or the Black Sheep. The reunion was emotional. These men had fought together. They had believed their commander was lost in action. Now, he stood before them alive. The country welcomed Boyington as a hero. His story captured the imagination of the American public. A fearless fighter pilot, a legendary squadron commander, a man who broke records, a man who survived the enemy's prison camps, a man who had returned from the literal dead. On September 6, 1945, before his return home, Boyington had accepted his temporary promotion to lieutenant colonel, but his greatest recognition was still waiting. You see, when Pappy Boyington returned to America, he learned that the highest military honor in the nation had already been approved for him. You see, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had awarded Boyington the Medal of Honor in March of 1944. And at that time, Boyington was presumed killed in action. The medal had been accepted on his behalf and held until he could receive it. But the war had revealed a remarkable truth. The man believed dead was alive. On October 4th of 1945, Boyington received the Navy Cross from the Commandant of the Marine Corps for his leadership during the Rubble Campaign. The following day, October 5th, he entered the White House, where President Harry S. Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor. The ceremony represented the end of an incredible journey. The boy who had once looked into the sky above Idaho, the student who dreamed of flying, the engineer who wanted to build airplanes, the Marine pilot, the Flying Tiger, the commander of the Black Sheep, the prisoner who had survived. All those versions of Gregory Boyington stood together in that moment. The Medal of Honor recognized not only his victory, but also his leadership skills. The official citation praised his courage during the missions from September through January of 1944, especially his command of VMF 214 and the devastating attack on Kahili. He was credited with personally destroying 26 Japanese aircraft during the cited period. His final confirmed wartime total would later become 28 victories, making him an ace of aces. After receiving his medals, Boyington participated in a nationwide victory bond tour, helping Americans celebrate the end of the war and support the nation's recovery. He continued serving in the Marine Corps before retiring on August 1st of 1947. Because of his distinguished combat record, he was promoted to colonel upon retirement. But retirement did not erase his place in history. Gregory "Pappy" Boyington had become a symbol of the fighter pilot. He represented the aggressive spirit of the Marine aviation during World War II. He represented the men who climbed into aircraft knowing every mission could be their last. He represented the bond between pilots who trusted each other with their lives. And although his story was not one of perfection, Boyington was complicated. He was fearless, but sometimes reckless. Brilliant, but occasionally difficult. Confident, but not without flaws. These contradictions made him human. What mattered most was what he did when history demanded courage. When faced with enemy aircraft, he attacked. When leading young pilots, he accepted responsibility. When captured, he endured. When honored, he represented all those who never came home. Gregory Boyington died on January 11, 1988, in Fresno, California. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, where his final resting place served as a reminder of a remarkable life. From the forests of Idaho to the skies over the Pacific, Gregory "Pappy" Boyington lived a story unlike any other. He was a pilot, a warrior, a leader, a survivor, and a husband. And forever, he remained the commander of the Black Sheep Squadron.